This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. The book is One Deadly Eye. The author, Randy Wayne White, a Russian diplomat, disappears while
Yeah,
Doc is tagging great white sharks in South Africa. And members of
which
a
is something I've done, by the way. I was one of the first to do
to
that
do that.
years ago. Yeah.
And members of this criminal brotherhood, Bratva, don't
Yep.
think it's a coincidence. They track the biologist to Dinkins Bay Marina on the west coast of Florida, where Brotherhood mercenaries have already deployed, prepared to pillage and kill in the wake of an approaching hurricane. Doc has a lot at stake in this one. Randy Wayne White is the New York Times best-selling and award-winning author of the Doc Ford series in 2011. White was named a Florida literary legend by the Florida Heritage Society. A fishing and nature enthusiast, he has also written extensively for Outside Magazine, National Geographic Adventure, Men's Journal, Playboy, and Men's Health. He lives on Sanibel Island, Florida, where he was a light tackle fishing guide for many years and spends much
3,000 charters.
3,000 charters,
More than 3,000. Yeah.
more than, and spends much of his free time windsurfing, playing baseball, and hanging out at Doc Ford's Rum Bar and Grill. Sharks Incorporated is his middle grade series, including Fins and Stingers. Happy to have, it's been a long time, but Randy Wayne White back on this program, now with video. Welcome.
Steve, it's great to be here. You look fabulous, by the way. I
Thank
love your hair.
you.
Best time since the Middle Ages. It's the
Yes,
best time since the
that's
Middle
right.
Ages.
Yes.
Ado Ramos Teos.
So, what was the inspiration for One Deadly Eye?
I've lived in Florida a long time. I'm old, Richard. I'm very old. But the hurricane of September 2022 hit Sanibel Island, direct hit. The eye went right over our home. My adored wife, Wendy Webb, and I stayed on the island, stayed in the house for the hurricane. And by the way, and I mean this seriously, if they tell you to get out, get the heck out.
Mm.
Uh, there are reasons that we stayed. If people read the book, the first 3 or 4 chapters will explain exactly why we stayed. Um, in 2004, my old house up on an indigenous shell mound on Pine Island, right across the bay, I got a direct hit, category 4. I went right over the house. Uh, and I thought nothing can be worse than this. My old house stood up fine because the elevation on the shell mound, 18 feet, flooding wasn't an issue. But it was horrible. People died. The house next to me imploded. The house across the road collapsed. It was awful. Uh, that flash forward. I'm explaining why we stayed, summarizing. Flash forward to 2017, a hurricane called Irma was once again supposed to make a direct hit on Sanibel. And so we evacuated. We did what we were supposed to do. Packed up both cars, my boat and a trailer, all our valuables, drove inland Florida to an old defunct gun club I lease in inland Florida, 500 acres, a lodge, and thinking this is the safest, smartest thing we could have done. Richard, the hurricane turned to the last minute, came up central Florida. The eye went right over,
Mm.
right over the gun lodge, tore the roof off the house, knocked down timbers and trees, took chainsaws and a bulldozer and a tractor to just to be able to leave. Um, so 2022 and in 2017, the governor at that time said, if you haven't left by now, it's too late. So we did what we were supposed to do. We evacuated. You have about 12 hours notice, actually, in fact. And we have the best weather people in the world. I'm not faulting anyone. We got more than ample warning. But in the vagaries of nature, hurricanes change. That hurricane 2017 went right over us. We finally cut our way out, drove back to Sanibel. We couldn't get on the island because it was closed, which is smart. I'm not blaming them because an evacuated island, whether the storm hits or not, it's wide open to pilfering and robbery, which does indeed occur, despite the best efforts of the wonderful authorities. So this hurricane came along. On the peninsula, 400 miles long, 150 miles wide. When they say evacuate, evacuate where? You get on Interstate I-75 or I-95 north, and horrific rain in windstorm, cars broken down, no gasoline available, no hotels available between Homestead and Atlanta. And that's absolutely true.
Mm.
Evacuate where? So I amateur student of history, stupid thing, amateur student of history, and I knew the last time Sanibel Island had actually flooded was 1926. So what are the odds? We're going to stay. We stayed. I bought my wife a first class ticket out. She refused to go. So we stayed together, and I'm so grateful she did. But Richard, it was existential. And I told myself during this hurricane, I'm gonna pay close attention to what I see, what I hear, what I feel. How are the animals going to behave? In folklore, animals supposedly know a storm is coming, and that might
Right.
be true in terms of sharks, according to research done by Mote Marine Laboratory. But what I saw that day, that evening, and the next day, birds, wading birds, white egrets, um, pelicans, um, ospreys, they covered the trees like Christmas decorations, all dead. I saw coyotes being swept by the storm surge, reptiles, snakes of unknown varieties, whole island of fire ants rafted up, all riding this horrific storm surge, which flooded the island like a whitewater river, only it was a black, chalky, milky mix of petroleum and pesticides and awful. And I paid very close attention. And the opportunity to use what we experienced in this book, One Deadly Eye, I wasn't going to pass it up. It's I hope it's a fast, fun thriller novel. I think it is. But I also wanted it to be a historic document, and I think it is. Because I've spent many years in this coast. Back in the 70s and the 1980s, I was able to interview people who had survived the hurricanes, the killer hurricanes of 1921, 1923, 1926, 1935, when the dike at Lake Okeechobee burst and killed unknown thousands of people. I had all these stories in my notes, and I was able to weave the past and the present realities of those hurricanes into the scaffolding of what I believe to be a fun, fast thriller novel.
So Doc Ford has a lot at stake in this novel.
Yes, he does.
What
Yes, he
is
does.
Doc up to? I mentioned he's in South Africa.
Yeah. Yeah. Where again, I've spent time. There's a guy, if you look him up on YouTube, Andre Hartman. He's a South African. He was the one who invented the shark cage. And I went down there years ago with Andre and was among the first to ever go down with the great white shark. So I thought, what a great place to start this novel, because the hurricane that hit our island started off the coast of Africa, the
Mm.
Sahara Desert. And I thought this hurricane can follow Doc's flight path back to Sanibel. Although in the novel, I don't mention Sanibel at all. I wanted it to be bigger than just one place on Google Earth maps. It was all barrier islands. They're all in harm's way. So the hurricane follows Doc from Africa to Sanibel. I thought that was fairly clever, but of course, I had stopped drinking, so maybe it wasn't.
Randy, for those who are not familiar with Doc Ford,
Yeah.
how did you create him?
I'd been a fishing guide at Tarpon Bay Marina on Sanibel for many years, 13 or 14 years. I call it Dinkins Bay Marina in the book, it's fictionalized. I did more than 3,000 charters, light tackle charters. That's what I did. I was a full-time guide. I didn't go to college, not qualified to do anything but run boats and a few other things. Um, and the federal government closed the marina to powerboat traffic, so I was out of a job, but again, not qualified to do anything. And I'd always wanted to write, and I'd had success writing for magazines as a fishing guide, never about fishing. I wrote for Outside Magazine, Men's Journal, Playboy, uh, out of a job. And I thought, I'm going to write a book. I want it to be very readable. I want it to be exciting. I want at least 4 or 5 of the characters to be likable. And I wanted to sell because I needed to make money. So I came up with these characters: Doc Ford, the marine biologist, purely linear, cerebral, mathematical sort of intellect. I was a fishing guide. I knew something about fish. The secondary character is Pal Tomlinson,
Mm.
unrepentant hipster, a Zen Buddhist priest, literally, um, purely spiritual. And in my recollections, I figured Doc Ford was purely cerebral, linear. Tomlinson was purely spiritual. And those two cerebral components in me are always at war, always at war. And so in the first novel, I thought if somebody wants a second or third novel, these two unusual characters can be involved in a sort of death dance. And I think it made sense because in that war that I have, spiritual, linear, which wins? Which side of us wins? So that has continued out through the novels.
In this book, One Deadly Eye, you have a serial killer with a great
Yeah.
name, the Vulture Monk. How did you
Based,
create the Vulture Monk?
based on an actual serial killer who lived in Ukraine, lived in the former Soviet Union. Um, and he and 5 others escaped from a prison that is, in fact, a real prison called Black Dolphin Prison in Russia. Go to Google Earth, type in Black Dolphin Prison, it'll come up. And so I did research on that. And I spent much of my life traveling to unusual places,
Hmm.
none of them nice. And I was aware peripherally of the reality that these people exist, and they do indeed exist. And then it went into researching what some call the Russian mafia, uh, the oligarchs, the billionaires, many of whom live on the east coast of Florida. That's true. So it came to fruition that way,
Randy
that they
Wainwright.
would that they would target, they would gather a team of mercenaries and sit back and wait. Where is the hurricane going to hit? Wherever it was going to hit, that's where they would go. And they already had their targets picked out, the wealthiest people on islands from Pensacola down to Key West. Well, this hurricane happened to hit Sanibel, and so that's where they went. And they also had already targeted Doc Ford. I think they called a red tag, a red notice. They had a red notice out on Doc Ford. They wanted to kill him because that diplomat disappeared.
Randy Wainwright, the New York Times bestseller, is my guest here on Speaking of Writers. One Deadly Eye is his new book. Randy, were there any moments or characters you really enjoyed writing or exploring in this book?
Several, yes, several. The hurricane itself was a character. I say in the book, uh, hurricanes are only natural disasters when humans are involved. I've read, again, no expert, I've read that hurricane force winds, that dynamic, it's key to keeping the Earth's biosphere healthy. It's an important component. But when humans are involved, it becomes disastrous. That was one character. Um, there's a dog in the book I adore, Pete,
Hmm.
a dog raised by a geneticist of uncertain lineage, but an unusual dog. Not a super dog, not particularly smart, kind of like a Chesapeake Bay Retriever I used to own, um, who had had an ear infection, and he would tilt his head like that because the ear infection. People would say, it's like he can understand what we say. He's so smart. No, he wasn't that smart. So Pete, I like that dog. There's an old woman in the book named Loretta Smith, based on an actual historical Florida character, a lineage that dates back to the 1800s. And she's a fisherwoman, a fisher folk. And you do not want to mess with Loretta, as some people find out in the novel. And Doc Ford's always interesting to me, and because he's torn by his own frailties, and he likes people. He genuinely likes people. As do I. I rarely meet a stupid person, and that's true. I generally like people. So
Did you always know that you were a pretty good storyteller?
I did not know. I grew up in rural areas and farms in Ohio and North Carolina. And I think there's a lot to be said for boredom in children. I think certainly it was a benefit to me because we had a little one-room library, and I would go there and I fell in love with books, Richard, and I just adored them. I never thought I was smart enough, certainly not well educated enough to actually write one, but I thought, hoped perhaps that if I could write a book, maybe I could be part of the magic I found in books. So I was absolutely driven, even as a fishing guide. I always wanted to write novels, books. Yeah.
Have you ever gone back to reread that first book that you wrote?
Occasionally, no, I don't reread my books. It's as if children have left the nest.
Mm.
They're out there in the noosphere on their own. But I will occasionally go back and leaf through pages of various books, and I'll think, you know what? That's a nicely phrased paragraph. Has the lovely rhythm, where I will think that is the crappiest piece of junk. How did I ever let that get out of here? But occasionally, I do.
How have you evolved as a writer, do you think?
I'm still driven. Um, it's never gotten easier. I'm aware that certain writers or who have co-authors, etc. I'm aware they dictate their books. I can't fathom how can you dictate a book? I have to have the feel of the sentence through my fingers, the typewriter, and the rhythms of the paragraphs, how they connect, interconnect. It's never gotten easier for me. It's just always a pain in the butt. Even the children's books were very tough, actually tougher to write. But have I changed? I've gotten older, fatter, balder, no less demanding, no less demanding of myself.
Randy, what are the ingredients that make up a really good story?
Characters. I think the reader must find at least 3 or 4 very likable characters. It's like a sitcom on TV. If the characters aren't likable, why? Who cares? I think the characters, some of them must be likable. Humor. It's a rare day in my life that something funny does not happen. And if I read a novel in which there is no humor, I find it quite suspect. That's not the way my life works. Whatever dire straits I've been in or we are in, people make jokes, they laugh. Humor, I think, is very important. Um, I try to avoid preaching. I absolutely despise being preached to, particularly about politics or the environment or health or whatever. I, I avoid preaching. There's a word for that, and I've forgotten what it is. Didactic? Yeah, something like
Mm.
that. But um, the reader has to like the characters. Um, I don't ever talk down to readers. Why would I? Many of them, most of them perhaps are smarter than me. I hope so anyway. Same with kids' books. That would really peeve me as a child. I'd read a young adult novel and here's some Yahoo writer talking to me as if I'm a dope. Um, and I think the bad guy has to be a believable bad guy, not some superhero freak. So who knows?
What's the best thing about being an author?
Well, see, flippant answer used to be groupies, which absolutely is not true, by the way. Uh, to me, the best thing about writing the books I've written is that they'll last. I think they will last, and they've made people happy. And I've gotten so many emails from people in with dire health circumstances, and they spend their last days, and I hear from their family members, and that just it's very touching. It really is very touching to some goofball like me to actually hopefully do some good in this world. I like that.
Hmm. What is next for you in your writing?
Already started the next Doc Ford novel. I don't want to give away the ending of One Deadly Eye, but Doc Ford goes looking for a very close friend of his who has vanished in a sailboat. Maybe dead, maybe alive. That's what I'm doing now. But I work every day, and that's my advice to writers, people who want to write. Yes, write. Your life is important. You know, the written word, in my estimation, is the only anchor in this rocket ship, rocket sled of a life. Photographs don't do it. If I see a photograph taken of me 20 or 30 years ago, and well, for one thing, it's just damn painful. But if I read something I wrote 20 or 30 years ago, it's still alive. I mean, it still exists. And if there's a key to success, whatever that means is you go into a room alone every day, close the door, turn off the dang phone and the internet too, although I've been guilty of not doing that too often. And you do your work without excuse. And it's a pain in the rump business. It's like pushing a boulder up a mountain.
Do you set goals for every day? I remember Elmore Leonard talking to him years ago, the late Elmore Leonard. It was a page a day that he always set as a goal.
What a great writer
Mm,
he was. The dialogue, oh my golly.
yeah.
I don't even come close to him. Um, Once I get into a book, I mess around and fart around, excuse the language, for a week or two, whatever it takes, and I'm in a room with no walls. And this is metaphorical. No walls, no windows. I have to feel around for the opening into the next room. Once I find that opening and start moving, then I'll try to do sometimes 500 words a day. It used to be 1,000. And I stopped doing that because I realized that to make my daily quota, I would write crappy. I would write 200 good words and 800 crappy ones.
Mm.
So I stopped doing that. But um, the key to me is once I get a hold of the story's thread, I don't let go because it's to risk losing momentum and the voice of that particular story.
And it probably could hit you at any time, right? Middle of the night when you come up with an idea, right?
More often now than it used to be after I flush the toilet. Yeah.
The book is One Deadly Eye, the new one from New York Times bestselling author Randy Wayne White, another Doc Ford novel. Randy, thank you so much for joining me.
It has been delightful. You do look great. I'm going to be in North Carolina fairly soon to see my family in Hamlet. And if you love good food, you can come down and have lunch.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll be
Ben,
down that way too. Yes, at Doc Ford's, I'll be sitting there one afternoon
oh, you'll
soon.
love it there.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's been delightful.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
this is Speaking of Writers.